There's nothing quite like walking through the beautiful snowy landscape of Skyrim at 3 in the morning during a rainy night. Even 15 years after its release, this game doesn't cease to amaze me. But how is it that a comparatively old game is still so relevant and has such an active fanbase, even today? I think it's hard to miss that I'm a huge fan. So the piece we're gonna look at today is called Far Horizons, and it's probably one of the most iconic tracks of the entire soundtrack album. I did a mock-up using the Vienna Synchron Prime Orchestra in combination with the VSL Studio Brass and the VSL Angelic Choir, but more on that later. Let's listen first. Jeremy Soule, the composer of Skyrim, is known for his unique and unmistakable sound. For this, he probably used a lot of samples that are not available to the public, but we can come close to his sound with just a few tricks. One of these tricks is the arrangement. Soule always has a catchy hook at the beginning of his tracks, and I think there's hardly a more iconic one than in the beginning of this track. All of Soule's hooks have two things in common. First of all, they're super simple, and second of all, they quite often consist of repeating elements. And that's their secret. If you repeat a statement again and again, it just has a higher chance of sticking with you. This melody in particular has a constantly repeating rhythmic pattern. You have 4 8 notes here and a half note tied over to a dotted half note, then you have a quarter note, and then it starts again with 8 notes repeating like this again and again. By avoiding big jumps in the melody, the biggest one is this open fifth in the beginning here, the melody becomes very singable and memorable. I performed this melody with the Viennese horn from VSL Studio Brass, and it really feels like it was made for this purpose. The Viennese horn already sounds very close to the original horn is very airy and dynamic. But to match it even more, I chose the Performance Legato preset here, and the long reverb and no convolution mix preset here. That really comes close to the real track. Another thing I adapted was the timbre adjust here. I set it to 75 because the horn in the original has a lot of brassiness, but not too much, and I think 75 is a really good compromise. We'll talk more about brass later though. Let's have a listen first. Next up is the strings, which are usually the backbone of Soule's music. You gotta get the strings right in order to sound like Skyrim. Soule's strings are very towering. You will only rarely hear an isolated string section. It's usually a lot of them at the same time. Now, we all know that a lack of motion doesn't sound very good when working with strings or with samples in general, actually. And this is why you will always find some delicate movement in the Skyrim soundtrack. Here the movement is in the cellos, it's very subtle and almost inaudible, but it is there and it's a pain to transcribe, I can tell you that. But once you got it, you end up with this beautiful melody contrasting the main melody in the horn. The rest of the strings is really just very long notes or pedal tones. Don't forget to use enough modwheel on that so that the samples don't repeat too much. And to add even more color to that, there's also a layer of flutes doubling the violins. It's again very subtle, but it really makes all the difference. Now let's listen to strings and flutes alone. The second part of the arrangement is basically just an extension of the first, and let's start again with the melody. The theme in the second part here is again in the horn, but now doubled also by English horn and violins, as well as by cellos an octave lower. The rhythmic pattern is still the same, only the notes are slightly different. The rest of the strings play the chords accompanying the melody. Let me show you what this sounds like individually. First, the melody. And here are the strings. That's very beautiful, but I think the more interesting thing is actually the harp here. I guess its purpose is to add a little movement to the mix and to push the composition forward. And so that it doesn't stick out too much, Soul cuts away quite a lot of highs and low mids here. Let's listen to that too. Believe it or not, but I really tried to get the velocity of every single note here right, because some of them pierce through quite strongly when played back with the rest of the orchestra. If this was a real harp in a real orchestra, it would probably sound very, very different. I think it's fair to say that it's a deliberate design choice that the harp sounds slightly unnatural here, and we're gonna talk about this in a minute. But before that, let's quickly go through the rest of the arrangement. The third part is basically an exact repetition of the first, but with much denser orchestration. The melody is still in the horn, now doubled by first and second violin, and an octave higher also by flute, even with tiny little ornaments here and there, which is very beautiful. The accompaniment is again in the strings, with a wonderful little counter melody in the cellos as well as in the harp. But all of this is now heavily supported by brass. I also added a contrabassoon here to thicken up the bass line a little bit. Alternatively, you can also use a synth bass for that. Let's jump to the last part of the arrangement. Here we have high chords in the strings, which are very, very typical for Skyrim if you ask me. We have the melody in the clarinets and in the choir, and they are playing the Skyrim theme right now. Brass is again adding color to the accompaniment, which is in the strings. We're gonna listen to all that in a second, but now that we looked at the arrangement, we have to talk about the other important parameter of Skyrim music, which is the sound. As I already mentioned, the harp doesn't really sound natural in the context of the mix. You can hear it's a harp without a problem, but a harp in an orchestral context would sound different in real life. You could say the same about the strings. They're so noisy and so airy that they're sometimes easy to be confused with woodwinds or even with organ. But that's exactly the secret. The sound of Jeremy Soul's orchestra is, well, orchestral, but to me it's more like the abstraction of an orchestra than a real orchestra. And that's really genius, because that is what makes his sound so unique and unmistakable. Let's go back to the parts that we didn't listen to yet. If you listen to the trombones and the horns in the original track, you will hear how brassy they sound, which is probably the way his samples are designed to be. I again used studio brass for this, which sounds a little more elegant and a little closer to a real orchestra, so I had to fake this effect a little bit. The great thing about Studio Brass though is that it lets you do it. There are so many things you can customize to get exactly the sound you need. For the trombones and the section horns, not the Viennese horn, I chose the long note articulation, and I chose the long reverb no convolution mix preset for the trombones, and the short reverb no convolution preset for the horns. As you can see, I played them very loud to get even more brassiness out of them, but I mixed them in a way that they are not too strong. Let's have a listen to this. Let's talk about strings and woodwinds now, and they are great to demonstrate the importance of reverb. Skyrim music is really just reverb, reverb, reverb. So these are the first violins, but what I did to the violins I also did to the other instruments pretty much. I turned the mix balance slightly to the ambient side, but not too much in order not to lose, too much of that scratchy bow noise of the strings, which is so typical for Skyrim. I sent that to 2 reverb buses. One with 1.8 seconds, the other one with 2.8 seconds decay time. Very little pre-delay on both, so that the music sounds like it's in this massive majestic space. Now let's listen to strings and woodwinds without brass, and I know I already mentioned it, but also listen to this beautiful counter melody in the cellos. It's really what makes the track so big and spacey. The last part follows the same principle as the rest, very brassy brass and very wet strings and woodwinds. The melody is carried by clarinets and choir, and for the choir I used the VSL Angelic Choir, which is completely for free. You should definitely check it out, I love it a lot. Now let's listen to that. Let's also listen to the other instruments in this part, which is to me the ultimate Skyrim sound. We have full chords in the violins here, long notes in the low strings, suspended cymbals here, timpani rolls, harp as I already mentioned, and of course heavy brassy horns. If you play this all together, you get this massive towering sound. Let me show you. And I think with this we covered everything. Not too long ago I did a video on the music of Kingdom Come Deliverance, where the most important thing was the arrangement. Well, it's also true for Skyrim, the arrangement is important, but even more important is the sound. You can take the exact same note material, the exact same composition, but if your strings are not wet enough and your brass is not brassy enough, it will just sound like a completely different world. And that actually makes a lot of sense too. I think the Skyrim soundtrack works more on an abstract level, and it's there to provoke metaphors and associations. The heavy brass, for example, could be a metaphor for big vast mountains, and those airy noisy strings could be like, heavy clouds or far horizons in the distance. A great example for how closely sound design and score music are related. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Thank you so much for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.